Welcome to Steady Badge's Stories. I'm glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, if you're listening from somewhere in Canada, drop your city or province in the comments right now. I want to see how far this one travels. Hit that like button and subscribe if this is your first time here. Every story on this channel is built for people who understand that real courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a set of second-hand scrubs and mops the floors of a 12-bed hospital in Northern Ontario. Let's begin. She was just a nursing student on rotation. The attending physician had not bothered to learn her name. The charge nurse handed her a mop and pointed her toward the supply corridor. Nobody at Birchwood Falls General Hospital asked where Hazel Vickery came from, what she had done before this, or what she had walked away from to be standing here at 9:20 on a Tuesday morning with a mop in her hands. That suited Hazel fine. She had arranged it this way. Then 2 Canadian Armed Forces vehicles came around the bend on Highway 101 and turned hard into the hospital's back lot. And 3 soldiers carried a bleeding man through the service entrance on a litter, and the warrant officer leading the team swept the room and found the woman standing at the far end of the corridor with her hands in her scrub pockets and nothing readable on her face, and he went still for just a moment. Then he spoke a name into the silence, not her name, the other one. What happened in the 30 seconds after that changed everything in that building. Dr. Fenwick had been the only attending physician at Birchwood Falls General for 27 years. And he wore this tenure the way a man wears a coat that no longer fits, but that he has owned too long to think about replacing. He moved through the ward with the compact authority of someone who had never been meaningfully contradicted in his own building, and had formed his opinions about the appropriate order of things in a hospital, sometime around 1994, and had seen no particular reason to update them since. He called the nursing students the student. He had called every nursing student who had rotated through his floor the student for as long as anyone could remember. It was not a taunt. It was simply the clearest description of what they were to him. Temporary, interchangeable, here to learn and then to leave. Hazel Vickery was the current one, 31 days in. Student. Dr. Fenwick said it from the nurse's station without looking up from his notes. Linen cart needs restocking. Supply room, bottom shelf. Yes, doctor, Hazel said. She did not correct him. She went and restocked the linen cart. She had been doing this for 31 days. Hazel Vickery was 38 years old. She wore her dark auburn hair cut short, just at the jaw, tucked behind her ears when she was working. She was 5'6" and moved through rooms the way water moves through narrow places, quietly, efficiently, without disturbing what was already there. Her scrubs were a size too large. She had chosen them that way. The extra fabric at the left cuff covered the scar along her forearm, a wide pale stripe from a cable snap during a technical rescue on a cliff face in British Columbia that she had never particularly wanted to explain. The loose collar covered the rest. She was 3 years out of the Canadian Armed Forces. She was 18 months into a nursing diploma program at Northern College. She was here, at Birchwood Falls General, a 12-bed critical access hospital 90 kilometers north of Timmins, because the third-year clinical rotation had to go somewhere, and Birchwood Falls was where they sent you when all the closer placements were already filled. She had not told anyone here where she had spent the 11 years before this. It was not a lie, no one had asked. The hospital had existed in its current form since 1979, with one addition in 1988 that had been designed by someone who seemed to believe that corridors could turn at whatever angle they liked. The result was a building that made a certain kind of functional sense if you had worked in it for years, and a different, stranger kind of sense if you were the type of person who cataloged spatial layouts automatically. As a reflex, the way someone who had spent years being inserted into unknown environments learned to do simply to remain oriented. Hazel was that type of person. She had memorized the floor plan on day 1. She had checked the fire exits on day 2. On day 3, she had inventoried the trauma cart, not because she was asked to, because she needed to know what was there and where it was, and the habit of knowing that had outlasted 11 years of everything else. The charge nurse was a woman named Cheryl, 52 years old, efficient in the contained way of someone who had managed a rural hospital floor for 14 years and had long since resolved herself to the particular shape of this work. She called Hazel, the student from Northern College, the same way Dr. Fenwick called her the student. She was not unkind. She was simply precise, and the precision did not include distinguishing between nursing students who were 22 years old and nursing students who were 38 and had done things that most people in this building would find difficult to picture. Hazel had made peace with this. She was good at making peace with things she could not change. It was a skill she had developed in conditions that required it much more urgently than a rural hospital rotation. On the 14th day, she was assigned to a patient in room 6 who changed the character of her mornings. His name was Reg Coulter. He was 82 years old. His chart said hip replacement, and the notes indicated that he had refused to wait for the surgery van from Timmins and had instead driven himself to the hospital, which was not medically advisable and which Reg Coulter had apparently found entirely beside the point. He was sitting up against the headboard with a paperback western on his lap when Hazel came in for his afternoon vitals, and he looked at her the way an old man looks at something he finds quietly interesting. "Afternoon," he said. "Good afternoon, Mr. Coulter." "Reg," he said. "Mr. Coulter is what my bank calls me." He watched her wrap the blood pressure cuff around his arm. His eyes did not follow the cuff. They stayed on her hands. "You move quiet," he said. "Do I?" Not a question, an observation. He waited while she inflated the cuff. Most people who do that move quiet that way. They learned it somewhere specific. She read the numbers. 132/78, pulse steady at 64, she wrote them in the chart. "Good numbers," she said. "Didn't ask about my numbers." She clipped the chart to the foot of the bed. "Reg." "Hazel," he said. She looked at him. "You're wearing a name badge," he said mildly. "I'm old, not blind." He settled back against the headboard. "What branch?" She set the chart down. "Just a nursing student," she said. The sound he made was short and dismissive, not of her but of the answer. He picked up his paperback. "Sure you are," he said, and left it there. She was almost to the door when he spoke again, quietly. "My boy did 2 tours with the Princess Pats," he said. "Afghanistan, 04 and 07. He walks the same way you walk," a pause, quiet like the ground might give. She stood with her hand on the doorframe. She did not turn around. "I hope he's well," she said. "He is," said Reg. "Thanks to people like whoever you actually are." He opened his book. "See you tomorrow, Hazel." In the corridor, she stood with her back against the wall and counted her heartbeat until it was where she needed it. 54, 54, 54. The days that followed had a rhythm she had come to rely on. Mornings at 6:15, an hour before her shift. The overnight nurse, a quiet woman named Pam, would nod when Hazel came through the door and return to her notes without comment. This was the correct response. Hazel operated best when her arrival produced no particular reaction. She poured coffee. She reviewed the overnight charts. She made notes in the small pad she kept in her left scrub pocket that no one had ever asked about. Dr. Fenwick arrived at 7:40 each morning and reviewed the previous night's summary without greeting anyone, and assigned tasks without looking up. "Student room 3 is overdue for morning obs." "Yes, doctor." "Student. Family in the waiting area for Mrs. Beaulieu. Give them an update." "Yes, doctor." She delivered every update with the same flat, unhurried accuracy she applied to everything else, and she did not correct him, and she did not volunteer her name, and the days passed in this way. And she was invisible and contained, and that was the arrangement she had made with herself when she had walked out of CFB Trenton 3 years ago, and taken the 401 West until she stopped feeling like herself. On the second week, she came back to room 6 and found that Reg had somehow, in defiance of hip replacement recovery protocol, obtained a small chess set from the gift shop cart and had it arranged on his meal tray. "You play?" he asked. "I do," she said, because she was tired that afternoon and it slipped out before she managed the more careful answer. He gestured at the chair. She sat down just for a moment. They played for 20 minutes. He was good. She was better, and she was careful not to show it by too wide a margin, but he noticed anyway. "You play fast," he said. Like someone who learned somewhere they didn't have much time for it. "Forward operating bases," she said, and stopped. His face did not change. He moved a bishop. "Army," he said. "Air Force." She studied the board. "Sartec." Reg was quiet for a moment. "Search and rescue." He nodded once slowly, like something had resolved itself. 8-9 years? 11. He looked at her. "That's a long time," he said gently. "Yes," she said, "it is." She left before he could ask the question she could see forming on his face. In the corridor, she stood outside his door and breathed the antiseptic and old wax smell of the hallway and thought about the fact that she had just told a stranger in a hip replacement ward more than she had told anyone in this province in 36 months. Think about a time someone saw the real thing underneath the version you were showing. Drop a comment below. I read every single one. She was completing a medication log at the nurse's station on a Friday afternoon when she felt it first. Not sound, vibration, coming through the floor before it arrived through the air, a low, dense pulse that she had learned to register in her chest before she registered it in her ears. The specific frequency of heavy vehicles moving fast on a road not designed for them. Her pen slowed on the form. She counted the intervals. 2 vehicles, possibly 3, moving in formation, not decelerating. She set the pen down and walked to the end of corridor window without hurrying. Because hurrying was something you did after you had confirmed what you were dealing with, not before. Through the glass, the backlot, the birch trees along the fence line, and 2 Canadian Armed Forces light armored vehicles coming off Highway 101 at a speed that suggested the normal rules of approach did not currently apply. Behind them, a 3rd vehicle, all of them coated in the gray-white dust of winter training roads, moving with the specific coordinated compression of a unit that had somewhere to be and had already lost time getting there. Is that military? Cheryl was behind her. Yes, Hazel said. Call Dr. Fenwick right now. Tell him blast trauma, multiple casualties possible, arrival in 60 seconds. How do you know it's Cheryl? She said the name quietly. The way she said it carried something that was not loudness. Call him now. Cheryl called. Hazel walked to the supply room. She pulled on gloves without looking at the box. She stood in front of the trauma cart for 5 seconds, not preparing, confirming the exact location of every item she had inventoried on day 3 and checked every morning since. Then she stepped back from the cart, put her hands in her scrub pockets, and positioned herself in the doorway where she could see the service entrance. The doors came open 53 seconds later. 3 soldiers came through them the way people come through doors, who have done this before, in considerably worse places, and who are treating a rural Northern Ontario hospital as the simplest version of something they have performed many times. They were carrying a litter, 2 on each side with 1 directing from the front, and they were covered in the gray-white dust of winter training operations, their jackets stained, their faces carrying the stripped-down focus of people who had been running on adrenaline long enough for it to become workmanlike. The man on the litter was alive. The margin by which he remained so was not a comfortable one. The soldier at the front of the litter was not the largest of the 3, but he was the one the room organized itself around. He came through the door, reading the floor plan, the personnel, the equipment, the exits. All of it in a sweep that lasted 2 seconds and produced a complete picture. He was perhaps 45, pale eyes and a face that had spent significant time outdoors in conditions that leave marks. 3 days of beard, warrant officer rank on his shoulder, partially obscured by field webbing. I need your trauma bay and your attending physician. His voice was flat and factual. Blast injury, chest and right arm. He's been down 14 minutes. Bay 2 is open, Hazel said from the supply room doorway. Not stepping forward, not moving toward the situation. Information only, delivered at a volume just sufficient to carry across the corridor. The warrant officer turned and looked at her. He looked at the blue scrubs, 2 sizes too large. The short auburn hair, the way she was positioned, not standing back from the doorframe but occupying the boundary between the doorway and the room, with a precision that was not accidental. He looked at her hands in her pockets. He looked at the way she was looking at his casualty, and the expression on her face while she did it, which was not the expression of a nursing student watching an emergency she had never seen before. He said nothing for 1 full second. Dr. Fenwick was coming down the corridor. Cheryl was behind him, already moving the crash cart. Pam and the 2 junior nurses had materialized from their stations and were standing in the hallway trying to understand what was happening. The warrant officer began directing his soldiers toward Bay 2. He took 4 steps. Then he stopped. He turned back and looked at the woman in the doorway. He opened his mouth. And he did not say her name, he said the other one. Crow. He said it at a normal speaking volume, not a question, not a command. A direct address, delivered in the specific register of someone who has used this word in serious conditions and is using it now because no other word means what it means. The corridor went still. Pam's hand stopped on the medication counter. Cheryl's hand stopped on the crash cart. Dr. Fenwick, halfway to Bay 2, turned around. The 2 junior nurses looked up. Through the bay window, the 2 soldiers holding the litter registered that their leader had stopped, and they followed the line of his attention to the supply room doorway, where the nursing student stood with her hands in her scrub pockets and her face completely still. Nobody spoke. If you've ever heard a name said in a voice that meant someone finally saw you, stay right here. This story is not finished. Hazel Vickery stood in the doorway of the supply room at Birchwood Falls General Hospital and heard a name that had not been said in her direction in 3 years and 4 months. She thought about Reg Coulter, who had said that whatever she was carrying showed in the way she stood, even if he couldn't see exactly what it was. She looked at the man on the litter through the bay window. She looked at the rise and fall of his chest, which was wrong. She looked at the color at his lips and his neck and the angle of his trachea at the anterior midline, which was not where it was supposed to be. She looked at the dressing on his right arm, field applied and temporary. She looked at the portable monitor the soldier on his left had just connected. Heart rate 131, blood pressure 84/50, saturation 88 and falling. She took her hands out of her pockets. Something shifted in the hallway, not loudly, not dramatically. Just the specific quiet change that occurs when a person who has been choosing to occupy the edges of a space decides, for the first time in a long time, to walk into the center of it. "Excuse me," she said, not to the warrant officer. To Dr. Fenwick, who was standing in the Bay 2 doorway with one hand on the frame and an expression somewhere between authority and the first edge of uncertainty. She moved past him. He stepped aside without quite deciding to. Inside Bay 2, the 2 soldiers had their casualty on the bay bed, the litter removed, the equipment arranged in the particular way of people who have improvised order in bad conditions and are comfortable doing it. The man on the bed, the rank tape on his jacket read Corporal Whitmore, was 26 years old according to his field identification, and his color had moved from bad to worse in the 90 seconds since they had come through the service entrance. The trachea, right deviated, visible at the anterior midline from 6 feet away. The left chest not moving correctly, absent expansion on the left side, jugular veins distended. The saturation reading on the monitor, 86 and dropping. Tension pneumothorax. It was going to kill Corporal Whitmore in the next 3 minutes if nothing changed. Hazel pulled gloves from the box on the crash cart without looking at the box. She knew exactly where the box was. "What is she doing?" Dr. Fenwick said from the doorway, genuinely uncertain, as if the question was for himself as much as anyone else in the room. Tension pneumothorax. Hazel's voice was the same flat factual register she used for everything else in this building. Nothing about it changed. Needle decompression, then tube. "I need a 14-gauge angiocath and a 32 French chest tube tray, Cheryl." She said the charge nurse's name without looking away from Whitmore's chest, the tray, and a pleur evac assembled. There was a half-second where Cheryl did not move. The gap between the nursing student who had been restocking linen carts for 31 days and the person currently giving directives in Bay 2 was producing a visible short circuit. "Cheryl," Hazel said again, same volume, different register. The low absolute frequency of someone who has given this category of instruction before, in conditions that did not accommodate delay. Cheryl moved. "I am the attending physician," Dr. Fenwick said from the doorway. "You are not authorized to." "Doctor," the warrant officer's voice, not raised, not aggressive. The voice of a man who intends to wait out exactly this type of conversation for exactly as long as necessary, and who has waited in considerably worse situations than a 12-bed rural hospital. "Step back." Dr. Fenwick looked at him. He looked at Whitmore's monitor. He stepped back. Hazel was already at the patient. She found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, right side. 2 fingers on the skin, palpating the landmark with the certainty of someone who has performed this procedure in darkness and cold and moving aircraft, and conditions that made the clean fluorescent light of Bay 2 feel like a simulation of difficulty rather than the real thing. "Hold his shoulders," she said. One of the soldiers moved without being told twice. He had the shoulders exactly right. The other took the hips. They had done the positioning before. She could see it in how immediately and correctly they moved. She placed the needle. The hiss was immediate. Pressure-driven air escaping the catheter with enough force to confirm everything she had assessed before she made the first move. She taped the catheter at the hub and watched the trachea. 2 millimeters, shifting back toward midline. On the monitor, saturation 89, 90, 92, climbing. Heart rate 126, 122. "Tube tray," she said. Cheryl was already there, the 32 French presented, sterile ready. Hazel looked at the tray for 1 second. The confirmation scan drilled into her until it preceded action regardless of context. Then her hands were moving. 5th intercostal space, left side, anterior to the mid-axillary line. The incision, fast and clean, the blade finding the space with the confidence of a hand that has made this incision before in field conditions that made a well-lit rural hospital feel like an operating theater. Dark blood welled immediately, scalpel down. Kelly forceps into the incision, the deliberate controlled violence of tissue spreading. The procedure that looks like damage and functions as repair, the sight of which had caused Dr. Fenwick, visible at the edge of her peripheral vision, to go completely still. The room held its breath. She swept one gloved finger into the space, the confirmation pass, cleared, anatomy confirmed. Corporal Whitmore made a sound, deep and guttural and involuntary, the sound of a body being reminded it is not finished yet. "He's there," one of the soldiers said quietly. Hazel placed the chest tube, fed it past the first resistance and into position, connected the pleur evac, the machine engaged. Dark fluid moved through the tubing. "Sats," she said. Pam, who had come into the doorway and was standing with both hands at her sides, looked at the monitor. 93, 94. Heart rate. 116, 113. Pressure. 88/54 on the next reading. Not good, but moving in the right direction. He needs a level 1 trauma center for the arm and a full workup on the chest, Hazel said. She was stripping her gloves. This stabilizes him for transport. What's your medevac ETA? Orangey is 11 minutes out, the warrant officer said from the doorway. He had his radio in his right hand. He was watching Hazel with an expression she did not look at directly. That's fine, continuous vitals until they land. If saturation drops below 90 after the tube, call me. She looked at one of the soldiers. You'll stay with him until handoff. Yes, ma'am, he said, without hesitation, without irony. Hazel walked out of Bay 2. The corridor was completely quiet. Dr. Fenwick against the wall, Cheryl at the station, Pam in the doorway of room 4. Both junior nurses frozen exactly where they had been standing for the last 7 minutes. All of them looking at the woman in the blood-stained scrubs, who had just placed a needle and a chest tube in under 5 minutes in a 12-bed rural hospital in northern Ontario, and who was walking toward the utility room at the end of the corridor with the same unhurried pace she used to return the linen cart to the supply room. Nobody said anything. If someone you love has ever been saved by a pair of hands that refuse to stop, hit that like button. This one is for them. Hazel ran cold water over her hands in the utility sink until the drain ran clear. She stood there until her pulse was where she needed it. The door opened 40 seconds later. Warrant Officer Dunn came in the way a large man enters a small room when he is aware of its size. He stayed near the door. He looked at Hazel at the sink. He looked at the water running over her hands. Dispatch pulled the student list for this facility when we were routing in, he said. Hazel Vickery, Northern College 3rd-year clinical. I almost missed it. He paused. I've never known a nursing student who could read a tracheal deviation from 10 feet out and call the tube size before she was in the room. The water ran. Crow, he said again. The way you say a confirmed thing. 424 Squadron Trenton, SARTEC, 7 years active, 2 deployments, 2 exchange postings, separated 2022. He paused. You were the best search and rescue technician I ever worked alongside, and I've worked alongside a lot of them. She kept her eyes on the drain. We were running winter warfare exercises at the Camp Borden Annex, he said. Whitmore's vehicle hit a detonator from an adjacent training sector. Shouldn't have been possible, and was. He was down in 40 seconds. I had 2 choices. Timmins, 38 minutes. Here, 14. He let that settle. Dispatch flagged a name attached to a SARTEC service record, and I made the call. You didn't know I'd step forward, she said. No, he said. I didn't. A pause. But I know what a person looks like when they're making themselves stay in the back of the room. And I know what they look like when they stop. She turned the water off. She stood with her hands on the rim of the sink. I left for a reason, she said. I know. Then you know I can't. I'm not here to recruit you, Dunn said. I'm not asking you to recertify or re-enlist or go back to anything you've left. He was quiet for a moment. I'm here because a name came up on a dispatch screen and I made a call that turned out to be right, and I think you should know the call sign still fits. Another pause. And because I have something to tell you that I could have not told you, I chose not to do that. She looked at him then. Matt Arsenault, he said. The name arrived in the room before she was ready for it, past everything she had built since the last time she'd heard it, straight to the place where the building began. Her hands tightened on the rim of the sink. He made it through everything, Dunn said. His voice was level, but the levelness was deliberate, the careful control of someone delivering something that required care. After the Labrador mission, after the evac, after all of it, he recovered completely, finished his contract, went civilian, became a whitewater guide up in Algonquin. Good job, he loved it. A pause. 7 months ago, a client's kayak went over in a Class 4 rapid. Matt went in after her. He got her out. He didn't make it out himself. The room was very quiet. 7 months ago. 7 months ago, Hazel had been sitting in a classroom in Timmins, learning how to document routine medication passes. She had been invisible and unreachable, and exactly as protected from the world as she had designed herself to be. And Matt Arsenault, who had survived a cliff face extraction in a February ice storm, and the long grinding recovery that followed, had drowned in an Algonquin rapid pulling someone else to shore, and she had not known. Because she had made herself the kind of person who could not be found. Because being unfindable had seemed, at the time, like a reasonable way to protect the people she cared about from whatever she had become after 11 years of other people's worst days. She had not been there. He used to say I was terrible at being ordinary, she said. Her voice was not steady. She did not try to make it steady. He was right, Dunn said gently. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He said I had the worst poker face he'd ever seen on a SARTEC. That's because you did. She stood at the sink for a long moment. The antiseptic smell of the room, the drip of the faucet, the distant sound of the orange helicopter beginning its descent to the parking lot, that low vibration coming up through the floor before it resolved into sound in the air. Her body registered it before her mind did, the way it always had. She breathed in, she breathed out. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me you didn't have to." "No," he said, "I didn't." He reached into his jacket and set a plain white card on the edge of the sink. One number in black ink. "That's not an offer, it's a contact. People who speak the same language if you ever want to talk to someone who understands what this work costs." He paused at the door. "Whitmore would have been gone before we reached Timmins. You know that." He left. Hazel stood in the utility room with the card on the sink edge for 3 minutes. Then she walked back into the hallway. Dr. Fenwick was at the nurse's station. He looked up when she came out of the utility room door. He looked at her blood-stained scrubs, the spray across the front, the staining at the cuffs, with an expression she had not seen on him in 31 days. Not diagnostic, not authoritative. Just a man registering what he was looking at and processing it against what he had previously assumed, and finding that the assumptions required revision. "The needle placement," he said. "Second intercostal space, midclavicular line." "Yes, doctor." "Correct." He was not asking, he was verifying something he had watched, and the tube, fifth space, anterior mid-axillary. "Yes, doctor." He looked at her for a long moment. The chart in his hand was not being read. He was looking at Hazel Vickery with the specific expression of a man who has held a fixed understanding of something for a very long time, and has just encountered information that requires him to take it apart. "What branch?" he said. "Air Force, SAR Tech." He nodded once. He looked down at his chart and wrote something. He looked back up. "There are clean scrubs in the supply room," he said. He paused. "Your size." Another pause. "You should change before the evening shift." It was not an apology. It was not close to an apology. But it was the thing a man says when he does not have the vocabulary for what he means and is offering the next available thing to it. She understood it and she accepted it. "Thank you, doctor," she said. She stopped by room 6 before she changed her scrubs. The reading lamp was on, casting amber light. Reg Coulter was awake. His chess set sat on the tray, arranged and untouched. He was looking at the door. "You saved that soldier," he said when she came in. "He's stable. Medevac just lifted." "I heard it." He watched her face with the careful attention she had come to expect from him. "You all right?" She pulled his chart from the foot of the bed. Afternoon vitals logged by Pam. Blood pressure elevated 151/90. Pulse 69. Irregular. A notation beside it that had not been there yesterday. She looked at the notation for a moment. Then she set the chart down and sat in the chair beside his bed. The chair she had never sat in 31 days of standing in this room with a clipboard, and maintaining the careful geometry of student and patient. She sat without the clipboard. "I found out today that a friend died," she said. 7 months ago. I didn't know." Reg said nothing for a moment. He understood what silence was for. It was one of the things she had come to value about him. "I made myself unreachable," she said. "I told myself I was protecting people." "Were you?" he said, not cruelly, as a question that deserved a real answer. She was quiet for a long time. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I was protecting myself and I told myself a better story about it." He looked at her with the pale, steady eyes of a man who had been looking at things clearly for 82 years. "You're going to be all right," he said. "I don't know that." "I do." He closed his eyes briefly. "Good night, Hazel." She sat beside him until he slept. Then she walked back to the station and filled in the evening incident forms, and did not pick up Dunn's card from the utility sink and thought about it anyway. The internal phone rang at 2:23 in the morning. Hazel had been at the station since midnight, having told Pam she would cover the early hours, having been grateful when Pam accepted without asking why. Pam picked up the receiver, listened, and held it out without speaking. Her face said enough. Hazel walked the corridor without hurrying. It was the specific unhurried pace of someone who has learned, through repetition in difficult places, that the speed of your approach changes nothing about what you find when you arrive. Room 6 was quiet, the reading lamp off, only monitor light. Reg's breathing was audible from the doorway. Shallow and rapid in a way it had not been at 9 o'clock. She checked his pulse. The fast, slow-fast pattern she recognized confirmed what the afternoon notation had flagged. She looked at the monitor, the chaotic wavering line of new-onset atrial fibrillation. Acute, destabilizing, in an 82-year-old man 4 days post-hip replacement with an uncharted cardiac history. She reached for the phone. His hand closed on her wrist. "Hazel," he said, completely calm. She stopped. His grip was the same as always, measured and specific, weaker than yesterday, and he had not tried to conceal it. "I know what this is," he said. I've been around long enough to know, he looked at her. Sit down first. She looked at him. She sat down. He worked through a breath that took longer than it should. Outside the window, the darkness over the birch trees was complete. Just the faint gray suggestion of the tree line against the sky. My son wanted to drive up from Ottawa, he said. I told him to stay. He has 2 little ones and a winter highway, and his worry is. He moved his hand slightly toward the room, the situation. Not useful to either of us right now. A pause. But you. He looked at her. You've been in rooms like this before, not this room. But this situation. Someone who needed to be accompanied through the hard part. I'm afraid, she said. Not of this, he said. Not of sitting with someone when there's nothing left to fix. That's different from afraid. His hand on her wrist, not urgent, just present. Stay a minute. She took his hand in both of hers. She stayed. His breathing slowed. The monitor traced its wavering line, irregular but not yet in the configuration that meant immediate collapse. He had time, not a lot of time, but enough for what he was using it for. My boy's commanding officer, he said. After the second tour, wrote a letter. Said the bravest thing a soldier does isn't the obvious thing. He paused for a breath. He said sometimes the bravest thing is to stay with someone even when staying doesn't change the outcome. He said staying was its own kind of courage. He was right, Hazel said. Yes, his voice was quieter now, the pale eyes in the monitor light still clear. You're going to be fine, Hazel Vickery. You don't know that. I know what a broken person looks like, he said. I've been looking at them for 82 years. You're not broken, you're carrying something heavy. A long, slow breath. There's a difference. The monitor tone changed at 3:17, not an alarm, a sustained single note, low and steady, replacing the irregular rhythm that had been there before. Hazel looked at the screen. She looked at Reg's face, at the stillness that had settled across both. Her hand stayed in his. She sat in the chair beside Reg Coulter in the low glow of the monitor, and held his hand and breathed and did not look away from any of it, not for a long time. Then she stood. She smoothed the blanket at his side. She stood at the foot of the bed for a moment, and looked at the man who had seen her clearly in a building full of people who had not bothered to look. She called the overnight line. She reported the death in clear clinical language. She said she would remain on site until the morning shift. Then she stood in the corridor outside room 6 and looked at the darkness inside. Matt Arsenault had died in an Algonquin river she had never seen, 7 months ago, and she had not known. She had been invisible and unreachable, and exactly as protected from the world as she had designed herself to be, and the design had cost her the chance to grieve him with the people who understood what he had been. Reg Coulter had died in a room she had mopped herself 4 weeks ago, and she had been present, and she had held his hand, and he had not been alone. She could not have one. She had been given the other. The weight of that sat in her chest like something lodged, and she did not try to move it. She walked to the utility room. Dunn's card was on the edge of the sink where he had left it 9 hours ago. She picked it up and stood under the fluorescent light and looked at it. Then she put it in her scrub pocket and walked back to the nurse's station. The morning shift arrived at 6:30. Hazel gave handoff thorough and specific, each patient by room number and current status. She gathered her bag and her clipboard and walked the corridor toward the exit. She stopped at the supply room. She looked at the mop in the closet, at the linen carts she had restocked, at the shelves she had inventoried, at the corner at the back where Dr. Fenwick had pointed his finger without looking at her face. She closed the door. She walked on. The parking lot was cold, Northern Ontario cold, the kind that gets into your jacket before you've finished putting it on, that smells like spruce and frost and the clean emptiness of somewhere with more sky than people. Her car was parked under the back light post at the far edge of the lot, the spot least visible from the entrance, the habit of someone who had spent a long time choosing positions that minimized exposure. She stood beside it and looked up at the hospital. 12 beds. One attending physician who had not learned her name in 31 days, and who had spent the previous evening quietly placing set of clean scrubs in her size on the supply room shelf, without being asked or mentioned it to anyone. The window of room 6 dark now, curtain drawn. She pulled Dunn's card from her scrub pocket and held it in the early morning light. 1 number in black ink on a plain white card. The weight of it nothing. The weight of what it represented something she did not yet have the words for. She could go back to Timmins, complete the clinical hours, submit the paperwork, become a civilian nurse in a civilian hospital, quiet and competent and invisible until she decided to stop being invisible, or until she ran out of reasons not to. She was good enough at the performance by now that it might hold indefinitely. Or she could figure out what came next for a person who was both things at once. The one trained in frozen lakes and cliff faces and moving aircraft to pull people back from the edge, and the one who had spent 3 years trying to wash that off in a utility sink, and had discovered that it did not wash off, and had eventually, quietly stopped trying. Reg was gone. Matt had been gone for 7 months, and she was only now beginning to understand how to carry that. Those were facts. They were going to be facts for a long time, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. But Corporal Whitmore was alive somewhere in a Timmins operating room, because she had stepped forward. And Reg Coulter had not been alone at 3:17 in the morning, because she had sat down in that chair. Not the version of heroism that announces itself, the other version, quieter, harder, the simple refusal to look away. The sun came over the tree line east of the hospital as she stood there, the slow, specific appearance of it above the birch and spruce. The way the light spread across the frost on the parking lot gravel, and the hospital wall, that dark window of room 6, and all of it simultaneously, without distinction, without asking anyone's permission. Hazel looked at the card one more time. She got in the car. The card stayed between her fingers, not put away, not set down. Held the way you hold something you have not yet decided what to do with, which is different from something you intend to let go. She pulled out of the lot and onto Highway 101. The road ran east, into the light. The boreal forest opened up on both sides, spruce and birch and the pale winter sky, and the highway ran straight and clear through the middle of it the way northern Ontario roads run, when there is nothing in the way and the distance ahead is longer than you can see from where you're standing. That kind of distance does not promise anything. It doesn't take anything away, either. Hazel drove into it. If this story stayed with you tonight, if Hazel's courage or her grief, or the way she finally sat down in that chair meant something to you, please subscribe to Steady Badge's Stories, hit the like button, and leave a comment right now telling us where in Canada you're listening from. Every province, every territory, every town. I read every single one. This channel is built for the people who know that real strength doesn't announce itself. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.